stealing bodies and jewelry and stuff. That's what he does.
In 19... Personally, I don't do that, but
He
yeah.
did it yesterday, but he's being modest.
Being modest, yes. All right. Well, thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having me. Let me give you a little brief explanation of why in the world I came up for this as a topic. I do a ghost walk in downtown Sandusky, and one of my walks, I was talking about the resurrectionist, body snatching in 19th century America. And I said, you know what, that would make an interesting program. And I mentioned it to one of my coworkers who was working in the office, and she said, I'm going to do some research. So she found an article from the State Historical Society written in the 1950s, and it just fascinated me. It blew me away, the topic. So I took that and I started doing more research, more digging around newspaper articles and such. And I put this little program together with some help of some friends because I'm not the most tech-savvy person in the world. But body snatching and grave robbing in 19th century Ohio and the United States. If you want to advance, why on earth would you want to steal a body? Well, there is a distinction between grave robbing and body snatchers, or as they like to call themselves, tongue-in-cheek, resurrectionists, because they were resurrecting bodies. Grave robbers were basically looking for grandma's jewelry, grandpa's pocket watch he may have been buried with. Resurrectionists were looking for a nice, fresh cadaver for medical research, because at this time in history, medical schools were booming, especially after the Civil War. There was a great demand, but there was also a great demand for bodies. And many of these schools required you had to have at least 2 anatomy courses before you could get your degree. Well, to get the degree, you have to have the body to do your studies on. And there was a problem. There was not a good source of bodies, because who wants to donate grandpa or grandma for medical research? It goes back to keeping the body intact. Many religions, believe in keeping the body intact. You don't want to be desecrated. So, if you will, next please. Try to have a little humor in this, since it is a gory subject. Grave robbing, just like treasure hunting, but with all the good spots marked. A friend of mine came up with that when he said, "You want to use this?" I said, "Yeah, let's use this." So, next, please. Since the earliest days of burying bodies with the Neanderthals, the dead have not rested in peace. Grave robbers would break into graves for, like I said, for the materials. Body snatchers, also known as resurrectionists, would break in to steal the bodies to be sold for medical research. Next, please. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This is a group of Louisville medical students with a cadaver. And I always say that everybody should love their work, but I believe this guy loves his work a little too much. He's got this weird grin, like, I really enjoy what I do. And I love, since before the days of scrubs, the little gowns that they would wear.
Looks like a prison gown.
Yeah. I mean, they're very gaudy. Like this picture here, like they're very flowery, checks, prints, just.
It looks like sack ticking.
Yes, yeah. And, but you can tell they've got their hats on, he's got his tie, but he's keeping covered up where he don't mess up his clothes, so. But yeah, the little grin on this guy's face, everybody else is kind of serious. Hey, we're studying for medical science, and this guy's kind of like, I really love my work. So, don't know what the story is there. Like I said, due to the high demand for medical practices during the 18th and 19th centuries, bodies were stolen for research. Some of the great sources for bodies were poorhouses, penitentiaries. There's a quote in a Columbus paper where they said that the bodies in the state penitentiary were being dug up as fast as they were being buried. For this reason, there was such a market for it. And this is afternoon of, hey, let's get together at some friend's house and do a little medical research on the dining room table here, for all in the name of medical science. This is from probably like England, 16th, 17th century, when really the medical research was really, getting started. It started coming out of the dark of, oh, we can't do that. People were like, there's no other way we're going to find out. We got to have a body. We got to have something we can work on. As gory as it sounds. Next, please. Student homework. As you can see, this picture here, as gory as it is, there was always a legends of medical students having to go dig up their body and everything. Typically not. Normally it was a school already would have a body procured for medical research. But this is a group of grave robbers. You've got your lookout here. You've got a couple guys here who have done the hard work of digging. This is a common method of removing a body. Typically, a lot of times to save time and effort, you'd break open the top of the coffin, put a rope around the body, and pull the body out. It saves from having to do a lot of digging.
Did anybody notice that the recently closed graves were being dug up?
Yes. There's another quote. I can't remember the paper right offhand, but it was warning people in the area. It said, please be cautious that the ground is not frozen yet. So be on the lookout for resurrectionists, because once you had the body was, if the ground was frozen, you didn't have to worry about it. Or if the body had been dead for a few days, well, it's not that good. They're not going to want to mess with it. Some people, if you were lucky enough, maybe you had loved ones or friends, maybe they would watch the gravesite for a couple days just to make sure that nobody's. We're going to get into some other procedures here, things that were technologies that came out to try to prevent grave robbing. It just really evolved. It kind of, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, next please. Techniques. Some cases, these people were murdered people who were not, people were murdered for their bodies. There are some examples of resurrectionists finding maybe the town drunk, but nobody's going to miss. Women were paid to go to poorhouses, act as grieving widows to, claim dear old Uncle Frank. And servants were bribed just for stealing bodies, some cases. Body snatchers would even ransom bodies to a wealthy person, and we will talk about one of our greatest presidents here in a little bit, a little more about the story of that. Okay, next please. Okay, this is another pretty gory picture. They're removing the body. Like I said, typically a resurrectionist would not fool with burial shrouds, anything that was of value, because the penalties for grave robbing was not as severe as theft. A body was not considered property. It wasn't your property. So, but if you were caught with jewelry or rings or whatever, your penalties were greater than for actually stealing the body. Next, please. And this is another example, removing the body head first. Try to save some time, not have to dig out as much as you might need to. Next, please. Also targeted. Jewish grave sites were a good place because the burial of the bodies fresh, exactly. African American grave sites, pauper grave sites, prisoners. There is a story. I'm originally from Georgia, and I was doing some research, and one of the stories I found out of an African American who was employed, or he was a slave, worked at a medical college, and the college had him to dig up bodies for research. Well, after the war, they taught him to read, where he could read the obituaries to see what was that, the latest. Well, after the war and emancipation, he stayed on working at the college as a janitor and digging up bodies on the side. And it actually became a family business. His son helped him. Now, when he died in the 1880s, not surprisingly, he was buried in an unmarked grave. So,
So they couldn't dig them up.
that's right. Okay, next please. The fight against body snatching. If you had money, you might hire an armed guard. Fences were constructed. You see large fences around cemeteries? It's one of the reasons for them. Not only do they look nice, but to help prevent vaults. Vaults became popular to be used. My favorite is the coffin torpedo. And if you would advance next, please. This is a little invention. No, that's a morgue safe, but we can talk about the morgue safe.
Well, wait, there you go.
There it is. Okay, I thought we'd gotten ahead of ourselves. The idea behind the grave torpedo or coffin torpedo was basically an IED. You moved the lid, and you would have a shotgun shell to go off in your face. No joke. And there is a U.S. patent for this. This man got a patent in Columbus for this design, for this.
Well, then whoever did that, they'd have a body to sing.
Exactly. Well, there is one story of at least one resurrectionist who was killed trying to dig up one, and he set off one of these things. There is, you can see here in this picture, you can see the little shotgun pellets that were just like a shotgun shell. It just rigged up to explode in your face once you move the lid of the coffin. Next, please. Now, this is called a morgue safe. This one looks like it was left, but you could rent these. They would have these, and what you would do is you would rent this for dear Aunt Sarah and put it over the body for X amount of weeks. And then, you return it. About like, renting something, use it for like tables for a party or whatever. You're renting it for the time you need it. Then they say, hey, you can come back, pick it up. I'm done with it. Next one, please. These are some in England, and these were some that were basically put down and just left. You can see, look at the heavy, thick steel. I mean, this was like, some significant ironwork here that was used to try to prevent body snatchers. Okay, next, please. Here's another one where they put the heavy stones on top of it, try to make it that much harder. You also come into the next photo, which will be coffins, burglar-proof vaults that were designed to make it, if not impossible, very hard to break into. This became popular as a way to try to prevent body snatching. And next, please. And this is a coffin collar. This is basically a heavy piece of wood with a piece of iron you would put around the body in hopes that it would discourage someone from trying to, pull the body out. So, he's got a collar on him, So, and of course, the anatomy riots. At least 17 riots in the United States between 1765 and 1854. First one in Philadelphia. One here close to home is the Worthington Reformed Medical School in 1839 and the Western College of Homeopathic Medicine in Cleveland in 1852. These riots were so severe that the state militias were called out.
What were they rioting for?
Well, what happened is when word got out, okay, there was a body missing. Okay, where's the body? There's a college down the street. So basically these people would just form up and they were mad. They were going down there, hey, we want to search the place. We want to know, do you have our friend or our loved one? Yes, right. The one in Philadelphia, the story is that, I think it was Philadelphia. There was also one in New York. Supposedly a little boy went by one of the schools and ran home, told his dad, he said, I think I see Mom on the examining table. Well, naturally, people mad. They formed, they armed themselves, they marched down there, threatening, we're going to burn down the place, we're going to, start beating up doctors.
That happened in Willoughby, too.
And that happened in Willoughby, too, yeah.
There's also one in downtown Cleveland.
Yep. The Homeopathic Medical College. State militia actually had to come out to break it up. Shots fired, everything for that reason.
Wanted that body back, huh?
That's right. Next, please. Famous Americans. I like to say some of the people that we have on our money, if you look in your pocket right now, have a connection to body snatching in one way or the other. One of the more famous ones and most well-known examples is Ben Franklin. Next, please. Ben Franklin rented a house in London. He spent quite a few years in London as a diplomat and working for what was then the colony of Pennsylvania. And he rented a room with a young medical doctor by the name of, next please, let's see, William Hewson. This is a house they rented. Well, they were doing some remodeling, and they started finding bodies in the basement. Lots of bodies. Over, I believe it was like 20-something bodies, men, women, some children.
The smell give them away?
Probably used lime. Yeah, probably used lime to cover them with. And they believe also that there was a poorhouse nearby, and there was also some gallows nearby. So they were probably purchasing bodies, bringing them in. You remember the picture with the dining room table where the guys are in their wigs and they're looking at a body? Mm-hmm. Probably something like that. Dr. Hewson here was noted for his work on the circulation system, lymph nodes. He was real prominent in that. Dr. Hewson passed away in his mid-30s from one of the hazards of working on bodies like this. He took blood poison, cut himself while dissecting, took blood poison, passed away. So could be hazardous in more ways than one, not only for the doctors, but for the resurrectionists. Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, these were two of our founding fathers who were involved with the New York what was called the New York Doctors Riot. The mob came to the hospital, or what is now Columbia University, and they were trying to get them to disperse, and John Jay, in the next photo, was actually hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious by the rioters. Also, we have George Washington. I was talking about how there were a variety of ways to make money off of a body. If you had somebody notable, famous, with money, maybe you'd steal the body and hold it for ransom. Well, this was a case in late or early 1809 or something like that. This gentleman, if you can call him a gentleman, decided, hey, I can make some money. I'll steal Washington's body and hold it for ransom. He breaks into the tomb. He steals a Washington, but he steals the wrong Washington. He steals one of his cousins. He has his head, what's left of his skull, and he's holding that for ransom. Not very common, but it did happen. If you had somebody of some financial means, you might hold their body for ransom. As crazy as it sounds. And, there's John Jay. Like I said before, he was one of our chief justices of the Supreme Court and everything. He was trying to break up riots in New York. Now, this is one of our closer to home stories. This is Senator John Scott Harrison, related to the presidents, Benjamin Harrison and William Harrison. Had a pretty unremarkable life. His death was a little more colorful. Senator Harrison passed away And even the family decided, hey, let's kind of keep an eye on the gravesite, you know, just in case and everything. And one day somebody came by, checked on things, and the ground was disturbed. They got to looking and found out that his body had been stolen. So a search began. There was a medical college in Cincinnati, and someone was sent down there to investigate. Found out that the body had been sold to a medical college in that state north of us that will remain nameless.
Place up north.
Yeah, a place up north. So they found his body in Michigan. It was basically hanging up, as gory as it sounds, it was hanging up like on a rack. Yeah, it was, but
Above the fireplace.
yeah, it was like they were hanging it up for God only knows what reason, but the body was returned. Now this caused an outrage, as you can imagine. This was in the late 19th century, as you can see, from 1878. After this, they started passing the laws to try to encourage that you could donate a body for medical science. Like you could say, hey, I want my body donated, or they could get bodies from the poorhouse. You know, they could go and say, hey, did this person say they don't mind? We'll take the bodies and do. Right, you know, if it's okay, we'll. So they did that. So this kind of, with changes in laws, it started helping body snatching to be. This is my friend's idea of a little tongue in cheek. This is Honest Abe. Honest Abe here is buried under, now he is buried under tons of concrete. If you go to this memorial in Illinois, his body is literally buried in feet of concrete. There's a reason why. After his assassination, he was put in a temporary vault until a more suitable monument could be built. Well, there was a group of counterfeiters. They had lost their best forger, or not forger, but the guy who makes the plates for the printing. Engraver, yes, engraver. And not forger. So they come up with this brilliant idea. Let's steal Lincoln's body, we'll hold it for ransom, get the government to release our man. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. They meet on the appointed night to dig up the body. What they don't know is one of the members of the body snatching group is a Secret Service agent who's working undercover. And they basically get there and it's like, hey, who brought the shovels? I didn't bring the shovels. Did you bring the shovel? No. So they're having to scrounge around trying to find shovels. I mean, these are not criminal masterminds.
They came unprepared.
Well, there's a guard shows up, a gunshot's fired, everybody flips out, takes off running. The body's never stolen. But after that occurred, when they did get this tomb ready, like I said, he literally was put in the ground and sealed up with concrete. I mean, feet of it. I can't remember how many feet, but it's quite a bit. I mean, you're going to have to blast him out to get to get to Honest Abe. Okay. Well, any questions? I know that's a lot of information, a lot of gory information, but I like to point out, as gory as this is, and as sad as it is, because I could imagine, and you can imagine also, what if it was your loved one? You go and find out that your loved one is dug up and somebody's made off. How horrible that would be. But in a weird way, we owe a lot to this because medical research would have never advanced. So you have that, you know, it's a double-edged sword. You know. It served a purpose, a gory purpose, and like I said, it's a fascinating story. And the more I got to digging into it, I was like, this will make a good program. I think.
I'm waiting for the Ken Burns documentary.
Oh yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't they also on gravestones put like skull and crossbones because that person died of an infectious disease that could be transferred, so it would keep the grave robbers away?
Well, that I've heard that. I don't know how true that is, but I've heard that also. Also, you know the term dead ringer? There is a There is a patent for a process where you put a bell with a string.
So they could ring it.
It could ring it, yeah.
Still alive.
Right.
They were buried
Yeah,
alive.
in hopes that somebody. Now, a lot of times it was not, like I said, it was not uncommon for if you had a loved one, like for example, George Washington, when he passed away, he was on his deathbed. His request was not to be buried for, I can't remember how many days it was, but leave my body out for X amount of days because he was afraid of what if I'm unconscious and you bury me alive. So, you had things like that because yes, sir.
Not to get too morbid about it, but was there an expiration date on these bodies? So let's say if you were buried 9 months ago versus 6
You would have probably not. You would have wanted a couple days, ideally, because without refrigeration, fresher is better.
There was no embalming either.
Right. Or if you did have embalming, because embalming started getting big during the Civil War because there was such a demand for bodies being transported home to loved ones. So you actually had embalmers who traveled with the army, and if you had money, you might go together and say, hey, we're going to have our buddy embalmed and shipped back home to wherever. But the thing is, with the embalming, that might interfere with some of the research, the chemicals and all that, because, ideally, like I said, the people who did this were on the fringes. They weren't getting rich. They were making some pretty good money. I mean, it was you weren't going to get rich doing it, but if you didn't have a job or if you were poor, if you were just kind of like at the lower ebb of society, you're also stealing from, most of the times, the lower ebb of society, the people who are sadly not going to be missed maybe. So that's why, pauper cemeteries, criminals, at the state penitentiary, nobody's going to come looking for the body. Probably they're not going to care so much that somebody dug up the guy we just hung. So yeah, yes.
Sorry not to ask another question, but
No, ask.
have you ever heard the rumors about the story that there were gangs of resurrections? They would fight with each other over who got the body.
There were cases.
2 or 3 competing.
There were cases of that, yeah. One of my favorite stories, I didn't mention it in this because there's so many different things that you find in research. And I don't have without looking at my notes, there was 2 patrolmen on horseback. They're riding through this town late one night, and they spot this wagon, and they're like, well, that's strange. What are people doing out this time of night in this wagon? They pull them over, and they're questioning them, and they're like, where are you going? With the wagon. And he said, oh, we went to the mill to get some corn ground. And it's like, well, that don't make sense. It's like after midnight. What are you doing hauling corn? So one of the cops reach over, and it's a body. So the guy whips the horse. They take off through town. Shots fired. Cops are firing at them, trying to get them to stop. They run off out in the woods somewhere, abandon their wagon, and just split up and just take off, leave the body. So, how common was that? I don't know, but it was a pretty good story. Shots fired, horse and buggy chase, through town.
I have a question. Is it more prevalent like in the winter or in the summer? Or
Ideally, you would want to try to get them before the ground froze.
Okay.
So I would say winter would probably have been good because it would help preserve the body because you're not going to have a whole lot of,
Right.
as gory as it sounds, shelf life.
Shelf life.
Yeah. But typically these bodies they didn't go very far. They were local medical colleges because these doctors at these colleges would be like, hey, they'd have their guy. I got exams coming. I need some bodies.
Right.
Now, if a doctor was doing particular research, he might request a particular body. He might say, hey, I'm looking for somebody that has liver failure. Can you find me an alcoholic? Or whatever, that's kind of tailored to their research. So that happened in some cases. But yes. Any other questions?
What was the going rate on the body?
It depends.
Schools can't have it. I mean,
Right. There was one quote, now this was in England, and it was the equivalent of like roughly $100, which is a lot of money. I mean, if you consider that you might not make $500 in a year, you sell a couple bodies for $100, and you're not working that hard. It's not like you're killing yourself at a job, you know, like you might be. So yeah, it would vary, but that was one of the quotes. It was around, be the equivalent of about $100, which, like I said, is not bad money. I mean, for that time period.
Were there laws that changed in the course of all of this that would prevent this from happening?
Well, in some places they started doing, making the penalties stiffer for stealing a body, because technically a body was not property.
Right.
So you could argue, it's like, well, that body don't belong to anybody. I'm not really. The big problem was if they caught them with jewelry, the burial shroud, anything of value, then they could say, hey, we got you for theft, theft of property. And
But
so.
science got better, they needed less bodies.
Right, yeah. And, you know, and as the law started changing where it got easier to get the bodies, you know, they could go to the poorhouse and request X amount of bodies, you know, for dissection. Because, you know, the story is that, you know, criminals, you know, executed criminals would be used, and they were. But there was never enough executed criminals for all the dissection, especially after the Civil War. After the Civil War, there was a real boom in medical colleges and people wanting to get their medical degree and trying to, you know, become a doctor. But the requirement was you had to have, I think some colleges required like 2 courses in anatomy. And to complete your anatomy course, you had to do dissection. It's kind of like in high school where you have to dissect a frog or you don't get your grade. Well, if you don't have a body to dissect, you're not going to get your license. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So once they're done with the dissections, et cetera, do they inter these people or what happens to the bodies?
Usually they would, you know, just throw them out somewhere, bury them, you know, kind of, we're done. Yeah. Kind of like Franklin, you know, they finished with the bodies and to keep from being in danger of being caught, you know, what are you doing hauling a body out of your house at midnight? They buried them in the basement, you know. Yeah.
Are there any stories at the Finnish Museum of people being stolen from the cemetery in town?
Not that I'm aware of. I'll say there's a lot in Willoughby, because it was this college that was a medical school. in
Yes.
Willoughby that ended up being Case Western, but they have a lot of documented grave robbers from Willoughby.
Okay.
And they found them, and there was a riot there, I do believe, too.
Yes, there was.
When family members
Mhm.
rushed the college there.
Yep. It happened quite a few times. Philadelphia, New York, we had at least 2 here in our state. But yeah, you know, happened quite a few times.
Right.
You know, more than you would think, but yeah, it just tempers would boil over and that, you know, so totally understandable. I think, matter of fact, I believe this might be a picture of the college in Cleveland. I believe it might be. I'd have to look through my notes, but yes. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit. And you didn't eat dinner beforehand. Oh, you did? Okay, well, it still worked out. Okay. Well, thank y'all so much.